Welcome to SLUMBERVERSE! Oh gee, another dimension of naps.
Hey there, sleepyheads. Glad to have you back. Before we slip into tonight's tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. On the night the sky dimmed and steadied, when the world held its breath between what was and what would forever be, the sea kept its patient rhythm against the shore. Far from the clamor of cities and the weight of legends, in a small coastal town where the lighthouse had guided lost souls home for over a century, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The Vindicators were making their final stand in dimensions beyond human perception, where abstract concepts like hope and despair took physical form and clashed with the fury of dying stars. Yet somehow, in that inexplicable way that hearts recognize truth before minds can process it, every living soul felt the moment when three heroes chose to dissolve themselves into pure light, rather than let darkness consume everything they loved. In that cosmic instant of sacrifice, a baby drew her first breath. Marcus had been tending the beacon that night, as he had for 37 years, his routine as immutable as the turning of tides. He was a man who understood the weight of small responsibilities, who knew that his steady presence meant the difference between safe harbor and shipwreck for vessels lost in the dark. When the cosmic battle reached its crescendo, every light in the town flickered except for his lighthouse beam, which somehow grew brighter, as if drawing power from some infinite source. The house seemed to hear its own heart, and between the radio's low gratitude about heroes and their quiet courage, Marcus felt something shift in the very air around him. A sound at the door was hardly a knock, more a shy rattle of the latch. When he opened it, the night smelled of salt and iron, and a basket sat waiting on the top step. Mist had freckled the weave, and within it, wrapped in a blanket that seemed to capture starlight in its fibers, lay the smallest breath, calm and new. The fabric shimmered with an ethereal quality, catching the nascent light as if woven from moonlight and forgotten dreams. It felt cool to the touch, yet promised immense warmth, and beneath it, a tiny face slept with the serene trust of someone who had arrived exactly where she belonged. A note hung from grey thread, its script elegant yet simple, as if penned by a hand that understood the brevity of words and the depth of meaning. "She will remember what we forget," it read, and Marcus felt the words settle in his chest, like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples he couldn't yet understand. He glanced into the darkness and found only the sea breathing under the sky, no figure retreating, no footstep on the stones. He lifted the basket with careful hands, the way he held the lamp's glass and carried the child inside. Her hair was the color of dried dune grass, her eyes the tired blue of winter water. She reached for the air with an earnest fist, and something long locked in Marcus loosened. He warmed milk while the radio fell quiet, as if even news needed to bow to this moment. As he held her crooked in his arm, learning her simple rhythm of 3 small swallows, a thoughtful pause and a sigh-like release, something remarkable happened. The child's eyes tracked not just movement and light, but something else entirely. When Mrs. Henderson from the bakery hurried past the lighthouse windows, carrying soup to her sick neighbor, the baby's face brightened with what could only be described as recognition. When young Tommy from the harbor helped an elderly tourist carry heavy bags to her car, tiny hands reached toward the window, as if trying to touch something beautiful and invisible. Marcus climbed the spiral stairs with the child against his chest, one steady step at a time. At the top, the lens waited like a patient eye. He trimmed the wick, checked the oil, and set the flame back to its tempered shine. The beam swept, found its groove, and wrote its calm message on the night again. The baby stared at the turning light with the solemn attention of someone who recognizes a song without knowing the words. When the beam crossed her face, she stilled and made a soft humming sound that seemed to harmonize with the lighthouse's electrical hum, with the rhythm of waves against shore, with something deeper that Marcus couldn't name but recognized in his bones. He tried names aloud over dishwater and steam. Some slipped away. One stayed. "Luna," he said, and the syllables rested in his mouth like a small shell. She watched him as if to say that nets catch fish, and names catch days, and this one would be gentle. Over the following days, Marcus began to understand that Luna's responses weren't random. She would grow calm and content when acts of kindness occurred nearby, her small face lighting up with an inner glow that seemed to reflect some cosmic approval. When the town doctor made late-night house calls, when the librarian stayed after hours to help struggling students, when neighbors shoveled snow from each other's walkways without being asked, Luna would hum that same harmonizing note, as if she were tuning into a frequency that connected all these moments of grace. The blanket that had wrapped Luna proved as mysterious as her arrival. During the day it appeared simple white cotton, but at night, especially when Luna was content after witnessing some act of heroism, the fabric would shimmer with patterns that looked like constellations, like neural networks, like the branching paths of rivers seen from great heights. Marcus realized he was caring for something far more extraordinary than an abandoned child. Luna wasn't just observing these moments of heroism, she was somehow collecting them, preserving them in a way that went beyond simple memory. The lighthouse itself seemed to respond to her presence, its beam growing steadier, more focused, and ship's captains began reporting that the light felt somehow warmer, more welcoming than other navigational aids. As Luna settled into her new home, Marcus understood that her arrival marked the beginning of something profound. A story that would unfold in the gentle rhythm of tides and the steady turning of light, guided by a child who carried the echoes of the greatest sacrifice ever made. The months that followed Luna's arrival settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing, yet touched with the extraordinary in ways that Marcus came to recognize like old friends. Each morning began with the lighthouse keeper's practiced routine of extinguishing the beacon, checking the weather glass, and recording the night's observations in his leather-bound log. But now these familiar tasks carried new meaning, witnessed by curious eyes that seemed to understand the importance of small, faithful acts long before she could walk or speak. By the second morning, the lighthouse had adjusted to Luna's breathing, the way a house learns the voice of new rain. Marcus moved about his tasks with the same steady presence as always, checking the brass fittings, wiping salt from windows, logging the beam's rotation in his narrow ledger. But now there was the soft punctuation of a child's hum, the small weight of a gaze that seemed to rest not on objects, but on the intentions inside them. He learned her rhythms quickly. If someone in town did something tender, Luna's shoulders loosened, her tiny hands unfurling like morning glories. If someone spoke with thoughtless sharpness, her eyebrows knit and her humming trembled, not in fear but like a tuning fork struck by a distant note. Luna's first word wasn't mama or dada, but something that sounded remarkably like light, spoken not when the beacon was brightest, but during a quiet afternoon when Mrs. Chen from the post office helped a lost tourist find her way back to the main road. The child's face had illuminated with that same inner glow Marcus had noticed before, and she'd reached her small hands toward the window, murmuring light, as if naming something she could see but he could not. The blanket that had wrapped Luna on her arrival night proved to be more than decorative mystery. As she grew, Marcus noticed that the fabric's nighttime shimmer corresponded directly to the heroic acts she witnessed. Each act of courage, no matter how small, seemed to add another thread of light to the weave. When old Mr. Garrett stayed up all night helping search for a neighbor's lost dog, a new constellation appeared in the blanket's pattern. When the school principal quietly paid for lunch for children whose families couldn't afford it, silver threads formed what looked like a tree with spreading branches. On fair weather afternoons, Marcus carried her down the spiral stairs and out into the salted day. The path from lighthouse to town was a ribbon of crushed shells and gravel. Luna watched everything with dignified concentration, the way old sailors watch the horizon for a line they alone can read. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery pressed a warm roll into Marcus's hand and, without being asked, tucked another into the crook of Luna's blanket. Luna's gaze lifted toward the upstairs window of the apartment above the shop, where a student bent low over books. The baby's hum deepened. "Late exams," Mrs. Henderson whispered, hearing the hum as if it were a weather report. "I'll send up some cocoa." She did, and Luna settled against Marcus's chest as if a little weather had cleared. The town learned Luna's music before it learned her name. Fishermen nodded when they passed, unconsciously softening their voices as they spoke of nets and currents. The librarian began setting aside picture books with broad, calm illustrations of rivers and stars. Claiming she thought Luna would like them someday, though the baby already regarded each page as if it were a window more than a drawing. Even Tommy from the harbour, who had cultivated a practice of scuffing his sneakers in loud defiance of caring, started carrying groceries for neighbours without announcing it. The first time he did, Luna's hum lifted into a higher harmony that made the freckles across his nose loosen into a grin he tried to hide. Marcus found himself becoming more attuned to these moments as well. Seeing his own community through Luna's extraordinary perception, he began to recognize the heroic frequency that seemed to guide her attention. The subtle but unmistakable vibration that accompanied every choice to help rather than ignore, to include rather than exclude, to persist rather than surrender. The lighthouse keeper realized he'd been witnessing these small miracles his entire adult life, but Luna's presence had taught him to truly see them. He started keeping 2 logs, his official weather and shipping record, and a private journal documenting Luna's responses to the heroic acts she witnessed. 3 kids share 1 umbrella. Luna hums in E, he wrote one rain-red evening. Mrs. Dev's arthritic hands tie perfect bows for gifts at the charity shop. Blanket flickers like a tide of stars. Sometimes he sketched the shapes the fabric bloomed with, branching paths that looked, to him, like both lightning and family trees. By her first birthday, Luna had developed what Marcus privately called her collection ritual. After witnessing an act of heroism, she would find a small object, a smooth stone from the beach, a pressed flower, a piece of sea glass, and carry it to a special box Marcus had given her. But these weren't random souvenirs. Somehow each object seemed to retain a connection to the heroic moment it represented. When Luna held the stone she'd chosen after watching the baker give free bread to hungry travelers, anyone touching it would feel a warmth that spoke of nourishment and care. As Luna's language arrived, it did so in small, careful bundles. She learned names for birds before names for toys. Gull, tern, wren. She learned verbs of the sea: lift, mend, listen. When she saw someone choose kindness, she would whisper light. And when someone chose themselves at another's expense, she would lower her eyes and murmur, shadow, not with judgment, but like someone describing weather that would pass. The lighthouse itself began to respond to her presence, its beam growing steadier, more focused, and ship's captains began reporting that the light felt somehow warmer, more welcoming than other navigational aids. Marcus understood that he was raising something far more significant than an extraordinary child. Luna was becoming a living bridge between the sacrifice of the Vindicators and the everyday heroism that kept the world's light burning. Each small act of courage she witnessed and preserved, like adding oil to the great lamp of human kindness. By the time Luna could navigate the lighthouse stairs with steady, careful steps, the tide pools below had become her second sanctuary, as essential to her daily rhythm as the lighthouse beam's nightly rotation. Each morning after Marcus extinguished the beacon, and they shared their quiet breakfast of oatmeal and honey, they would descend the winding path carved into the cliff face, Luna's small hand secure in his weathered palm. The pools held their own patient mysteries, creatures appearing and disappearing with the tides, each one adapted to the constant dance between exposure and shelter, salt and the blessing of fresh rain. Luna approached these miniature worlds with the same reverent attention she gave to witnessing human acts of heroism. She would crouch beside a pool for long, unhurried minutes, watching hermit crabs negotiate careful trades for better shells, sea anemones opening and closing like underwater flowers, responding to some music only they could hear. Marcus noticed that she seemed particularly drawn to moments of quiet cooperation, the way small fish moved as one mind to avoid danger. How different species found ways to help each other survive in the narrow space between high and low tide. It was during these morning explorations that Luna's gift revealed its next gentle dimension. She had been carrying a smooth piece of sea glass the color of morning mist, found the day before after watching Mrs. Henderson quietly pay for a stranger's groceries when the woman's card was declined. Luna held the glass carefully, the way she held everything that mattered, and when she knelt beside the largest tide pool and dipped it into the cool water, something remarkable happened. The glass seemed to warm in her small fingers, and Marcus felt an echo rise from it. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling that tasted like kindness, like the specific warmth of someone choosing generosity when they could have chosen to look away. He blinked, certain he had imagined it, But Luna smiled with quiet satisfaction and carefully placed the glass on a sun-warmed rock beside the pool. "It remembers," she said simply, using one of her new words with the precision of someone who understood its weight. Marcus knelt beside her and touched the glass gently. The echo came again, fainter but unmistakable. The feeling of Mrs. Henderson's small decision, complete with the stranger's surprised gratitude and the ripple of warmth that had spread. Through everyone who witnessed it, this discovery opened territories of wonder that felt both magical and perfectly natural, the way sunrise feels both miraculous and inevitable. Luna began collecting objects not randomly, but with careful intention, each one chosen after witnessing a specific moment of courage. A smooth stone from the morning, she watched old Mr. Garrett help a lost tourist find her way back to the main road. A piece of driftwood from the afternoon the high school students organized themselves to clean the beach without being asked. A shell from the evening Mrs. Chen stayed late at the post office to help a family track down an important package. Each object, when brought to the tide pools and placed just so, would release its gentle echo, the emotional truth of the heroic moment it represented. Marcus learned to wait with an open heart, to feel the story rise without needing words. The stone carried Mr. Garrett's patient kindness. The driftwood hummed with the teenager's shared purpose. The shell whispered with Mrs. Chen's quiet dedication. Together, they created what Marcus came to think of as a library of courage, a collection where the essence of heroic moments could be preserved and, when needed, remembered. The blanket that had wrapped Luna on her arrival night continued its mysterious evolution, its nighttime patterns growing more complex and beautiful as her collection grew. Now the constellations of light seemed to map the connections between different acts of courage, threads of silver linking moments of similar intention, golden pathways showing how one person's bravery inspired another's. Marcus would trace these patterns with wondering fingers while Luna slept, marveling at how they revealed the hidden network of kindness that connected their small community. Luna's vocabulary expanded to include words that described these subtle observations. She learned brave before she learned pretty, could identify helping before she could count to 10. When storms threatened the coast, and she watched from the lighthouse windows as neighbors secured each other's boats and shuttered vulnerable windows, she would press her small palms against the glass and whisper, "Light." Light, light, like a prayer of recognition, each repetition marking another moment of courage she was carefully preserving. Marcus began to understand that Luna wasn't simply observing these acts, she was becoming their keeper, creating what he thought of as an emotional archive. Each heroic moment she witnessed seemed to leave a complete impression in her memory, not just what happened, but why it mattered, how it felt to both the giver and receiver of courage. She could recall not just the facts of kindness, but its flavor, its texture, the way it changed the air in a room or the light in someone's eyes. The tide pools became her reading room, where these preserved moments could be shared and felt. She would arrange her collected objects with careful ceremony, sometimes humming softly as she worked, and Marcus learned to recognize when she was about to reveal a particularly precious memory. The pools themselves seemed to respond to her presence, their surfaces growing still and reflective, as if they too understood the importance of what was being entrusted to them. On quiet afternoons, when the light fell just right and the water held perfect mirrors of the sky, Luna would tell Marcus the stories her objects contained, not in words always, but in the gentle sharing of feeling that her gift made possible. He would touch a piece of sea glass and suddenly understand the exact quality of patience it took for someone to teach a struggling child to read. He would hold a smooth pebble and feel the specific courage required to apologize for a harsh word spoken in anger. Through these shared experiences, Marcus began to sense something larger at work. The heroic moments Luna preserved weren't isolated incidents, but part of a vast, interconnected web of courage that stretched far beyond their small town. Each act of kindness seemed to carry an echo of something greater, as if every choice to help rather than harm was somehow connected to a source of light that had been planted in the world long ago. During a night when heroes made their final stand and chose sacrifice over surrender, Luna seemed to understand this connection instinctively, though she was still too young to put it into words. Sometimes, while arranging her treasures by the tide pools, she would pause and look toward the horizon, with an expression of profound recognition, as if she could feel the distant ripples of courage spreading across the world like circles on water, each one eventually finding its way to these quiet pools where a child with gentle hands was learning to be their faithful keeper. As her 4th birthday approached, the lighthouse had become more than a beacon for ships. It was a sanctuary where courage was recognized, preserved and remembered, tended by a keeper who understood that some lights are meant to guide vessels through dark waters, and others are meant to kindle the small flames that burn in every human heart capable of choosing love over fear. The upper room of the lighthouse had always been Marcus's quiet retreat for weather instruments and navigation charts, but as Luna approached her 5th birthday, she began climbing those spiral stairs with the same purposeful attention she once reserved for the tide pools. The circular chamber, with its windows facing every direction like gentle eyes, seemed to call to her during the grey days when storms made the pools too rough for their usual ceremonies of remembrance. Marcus found her there one September morning, carefully arranging her tide pool treasures on the wide windowsill that faced the harbour. The sea glass caught the filtered light and scattered soft rainbows across the whitewashed walls, while her collection of stones and shells seemed to anchor invisible threads connecting one preserved moment of courage to another. She hummed softly as she worked, that same harmonizing note he'd learned to recognize as her response to witnessing heroism. But now it carried a different quality, the satisfaction of someone creating something that felt exactly right. "The echoes want to be together," Luna said simply, when Marcus asked about her migration upstairs. She touched a smooth piece of driftwood, the one that held the memory of teenagers cleaning the beach without being asked, and her eyes grew distant with the feeling it preserved. Down by the water, they have to wait for the right time. For up here, they can always talk to each other. Marcus understood. The tide pools had been perfect for Luna's early explorations of her gift. But as her collection grew and her understanding deepened, she needed a space where the preserved moments of heroism could exist without the interruption of tides and weather. He cleared the room of old charts and broken compass pieces, sanded a set of shelves from salvaged wood, and laid down a braided rug that had once belonged to his grandmother. When the work was finished, the space felt expectant, as if it had been waiting for this purpose all along. Luna's collection expanded beyond the familiar treasures of shore and sea. She began gathering small objects that seemed insignificant to anyone else, but hummed with preserved courage when she held them. A faded ribbon from the hair of a shy girl who had chosen to befriend a lonely new student. A chipped button from the coat of someone who had stopped to help a stranger change a flat tire in the rain. A pressed flower from the garden of an elderly woman who spent her afternoons reading to children at the library, her voice gentle with stories that planted seeds of wonder. Each object found its place according to Luna's intuitive understanding of the different qualities of heroism they contained. She created what Marcus privately thought of as an emotional geography, groupings that seemed to amplify each other's preserved stories. Objects that carried the echo of patient teaching clustered near the east window where morning light was strongest. Mementos of protective courage gathered by the north-facing glass where they could watch over the town. Tokens of quiet generosity arranged near the harbor window where they could witness the daily acts of sharing that kept the community connected. The blanket that had wrapped Luna on her arrival night now served a new purpose, spread ceremonially beneath her arrangements when she wanted to share a particularly meaningful echo with Marcus. The fabric's nighttime patterns had grown so complex they resembled star charts mapping unknown constellations, each point of light representing a moment when someone had chosen love over fear, help over indifference, hope over despair. Luna also began expressing these preserved feelings through simple drawings. Using pencils and paper Marcus brought from town, her sketches captured not the physical details of what she witnessed, but something deeper, the emotional essence of heroic moments rendered in flowing lines and gentle colors, a teacher's patient hand guiding a struggling student, a teenager standing protective guard between a smaller child and playground bullies, an elderly man sharing his lunch with stray cats behind the harbor, his weathered face soft with compassion. The room began to attract visitors in the quiet way that sacred spaces do. Mrs. Henderson climbed the stairs one afternoon, drawn by something she couldn't name, and found herself touching the pressed flower that held the memory of the librarian's story hours. She left with tears in her eyes and a plan to start her own reading circle for adults who had never learned to love books. The teenager who had cleaned the beach visited during a moment of doubt about whether his efforts mattered, and when he held the piece of driftwood that preserved his own act of caring, he felt the ripple effects of his choice spreading through the community like circles on water. Marcus watched Luna's gift evolve with the wonder of someone witnessing a rare flower bloom. The upper room became more than a collection space. It transformed into a living testament to the truth that heroism wasn't the exclusive domain of legendary figures with superpowers. Every day, ordinary people made choices that required genuine courage, and Luna's sanctuary proved these moments were worthy of preservation and honor. "You know what you're really doing here?" Marcus asked one evening as they sat together in the room, the lighthouse beam beginning its nightly rotation outside. Luna looked up from arranging a new treasure, a small wooden button from the sweater of a bus driver who had waited patiently while an elderly passenger slowly climbed aboard. "I'm keeping the light," Luna said with the simple certainty of someone who understood her purpose completely. The Vindicators made their choice so the light wouldn't go out. Now it lives in all these little choices, and someone needs to remember them, to keep them safe. Marcus felt his heart swell with recognition. The child he'd found on his doorstep had grown into the keeper of something precious beyond measure, a living archive of human courage that proved heroism was not a rare gift possessed by a chosen few, but a choice available to every heart, brave enough to care about something beyond itself. As autumn deepened and Luna prepared to start school, the upper room stood complete, a sanctuary where the small acts of courage that usually passed unnoticed were recognized, preserved and celebrated, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of heroism that connected their community to the cosmic sacrifice that had marked her. Birth, the traveling storyteller, arrived on a morning when the fog rolled in, soft and silver, carrying with it the scent of distant places and untold tales. Luna was in her upper room sanctuary, carefully arranging a new treasure, a small brass button from the coat of someone who had shared their umbrella with a stranger during yesterday's sudden downpour, when she heard unfamiliar footsteps on the lighthouse path. Not the hurried clip of townspeople with errands, but something measured and patient, like someone who carried stories instead of urgency. River appeared through the mist like a figure from one of the gentle dreams that sometimes visited Luna in the quiet hours before dawn. He wore a coat the color of weathered driftwood, and his silver-streaked hair was braided with small bells that chimed softly with each step. A worn leather satchel hung across his shoulder, and his eyes held the particular brightness of someone who had learned to find wonder in unexpected places. When he knocked on the lighthouse door, even that sound seemed musical, respectful, like someone asking permission to enter a sacred space. Marcus opened the door to find River, waiting with the patient stillness of someone accustomed to being welcomed or turned away with equal grace. "I'm River," he said simply, his voice carrying traces of many places like water that has traveled through different landscapes. "I carry stories from town to town, and something told me this place might have stories worth hearing." Luna appeared at the top of the spiral stairs, drawn by the same invisible current that had guided her to every act of heroism she'd ever witnessed. When River looked up and saw her, his expression shifted to one of profound recognition, the way people look when they suddenly understand a language they thought they'd forgotten. "You're the one who keeps the echoes," River said softly, not as a question, but as a gentle statement of knowing. Luna descended the stairs with calm certainty, her hand trailing along the curved wall the way she touched everything that mattered, with gentle attention and complete trust. When she reached the bottom, she studied River with the same concentrated gaze she reserved for her most precious treasures, feeling for the heroic frequency that she had learned to recognize in all truly courageous hearts. "You have stories about the light people," Luna said. It wasn't a question but a recognition, as if she could sense the preserved moments of heroism that River carried in his collection of tales. River smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered features into something luminous. "I do indeed, little keeper. Stories about people everywhere who choose courage when no one is watching, who plant kindness in places where it's needed most." He settled his satchel on Marcus's kitchen table with the reverence of someone handling sacred texts. "Would you like to hear them?" What followed was Luna's first glimpse into the vast network of heroism that extended far beyond her small coastal town. River's stories weren't dramatic tales of superpowers and cosmic battles, but gentle accounts of everyday courage. He spoke of a baker in a distant city who left fresh bread on doorsteps for hungry families, of a librarian who stayed late every evening to help children with their homework, of a bus driver who learned sign language so he could communicate with a deaf passenger who rode his route each morning. But as River spoke, Luna experienced something unprecedented. The heroic frequency she had learned to recognize in her own community began resonating from these distant stories, allowing her to feel the emotional truth of acts of courage she had never witnessed firsthand. When River described the baker's quiet generosity, Luna felt the warm pulse of sacrifice made gladly. When he told of the librarian's patient dedication, she experienced the gentle glow of someone choosing connection over convenience. Her collection in the upper room began to respond in ways that filled Marcus with quiet wonder. As River's stories unfolded, Luna's blanket shimmered with new patterns, silver threads appearing to connect her local treasures to these distant acts of heroism. The button from the umbrella sharer began to resonate with the story of the baker's kindness, both carrying the same frequency of selfless generosity. The sea glass that held Mrs. Henderson's grocery store compassion glowed softly in harmony with the tale of the librarian's dedication. "How do you know these feelings are real?" Luna asked during a pause in River's storytelling, her small hand pressed against her chest, where the heroic frequency always seemed to vibrate strongest. River's eyes grew gentle with understanding. "Because every act of true courage creates ripples, little one. The Vindicators' final sacrifice didn't just save the world from darkness, it awakened something in hearts everywhere. Most people feel it as a gentle urge to be kinder, to help more, to choose love over fear. But a few like you can actually sense the frequency itself." Over the 3 days that River stayed, he helped Luna understand that her gift reached far beyond the familiar shores of her lighthouse home. Together, they discovered that preserved moments of courage could be shared through storytelling itself, that the heroic frequency could travel through words and find resonance in receptive hearts. River taught Luna that every person who chose kindness was connected to every other through invisible threads of light, and that her role as a keeper of echoes made her a guardian of these connections. "You're not just collecting these moments," River said on his final evening, as they sat surrounded by Luna's growing collection. "You're keeping proof that heroism is alive and growing everywhere, connecting each small act of courage to every other through the great web of human kindness." When River departed the next morning, disappearing into the mist as gently as he had arrived, Luna climbed to her upper room with new understanding. Her sanctuary had become more than a local archive. It was a node in a vast network of preserved heroism that connected every corner of the world. Each small act of courage she witnessed and preserved, adding another thread to the infinite tapestry of human grace. After River's departure, a gentle hush settled over the lighthouse, a hush that felt not empty, but full, as if the air itself was listening for the next story. Luna moved through her days with a new steadiness, her gaze lingering a little longer on the horizon, fingers tracing the patterns in her blanket, now brighter and more intricate with each act of kindness she preserved. Marcus, sensing a shift in the wind and in Luna's quiet focus, resumed his well-worn routines, but with an extra layer of care. As if he too could feel the world tensing for something unseen, it began with small changes. The sea deepened to a bruised indigo, gulls circled higher and farther inland, and Marcus's barometer dropped with the slow certainty of a stone in water. The town responded with a choreography that Luna had come to recognize as the true heartbeat of heroism. Marcus checked the lantern oil twice, sandbagged the ground floor door, and phoned the harbor master in a series of clipped, thoughtful exchanges. Down by the shore, neighbors shared tools and advice, boarding windows and reinforcing boats. Mrs. Henderson, arms full of sandwiches, delivered food to volunteers, her laughter carrying across the wind like a promise that warmth would continue. Whatever came, Luna felt the heroic frequency growing stronger, not as a single note, but as a rising chord, each person's small choice harmonizing with the next. From her upper room, she watched as Tommy, now taller and more self-assured, ran from house to house checking on the elderly and gathering supplies for families in need. Even Mr. Garrett, whose knees protested the thought of stairs, stood at his window with a flashlight, signaling his readiness to help. The wind picked up, rattling the lighthouse panes, and Luna knew her tide pools would be unreachable for a while. She gathered her treasures, a piece of sea glass, the driftwood from the teens' beach cleanup, the button from a shared umbrella, the ribbon of first friendship, and arranged them around a brass basin filled with seawater. The basin became her new tide pool, a place where the echoes of courage could gather and reflect. She placed her palms above the water and hummed a note that seemed to resonate with the wind and the quiet bravery pulsing through the town. As night fell, the storm arrived with a voice that was both wild and ancient. Rain lashed the lighthouse, and gusts pressed against the walls. But inside, Marcus moved with practiced calm, tending the beacon so its light would not waver. Luna sat beside him, feeling the surge of collective courage. Neighbors huddled in the school shelter, sharing blankets and stories, the fire brigade clearing fallen branches, Mrs. Henderson's bread finding its way to hungry hands, and the harbor master anchoring boats with steadfast resolve. The heroic frequency swelled, a symphony in which every act, large or small, became a vital note. Luna closed her eyes and felt the warmth of it settle deep in her chest. Her collection glowed softly in the candlelight, and the blanket at her feet shimmered with new patterns, no longer just constellations, but swirling galaxies, each star a kindness, each strand a connection. At the storm's height, Luna dipped a fingertip into the basin. The water trembled, and for a moment she saw reflected there not just her own face but a web of lights, each one pulsing in time with an act of courage somewhere in the town. The blanket spread beneath her treasures began to map these lights, a gentle, living constellation of every soul who had chosen care over fear that night. She understood then, in a way that was both simple and profound, that courage was not a solitary thing. It traveled, multiplied and returned, weaving itself into the fabric of the community like threads of light through dark cloth. When the worst of the storm passed, dawn crept in, pale and quiet, painting the battered world in shades of hope. People emerged from their shelters, blinking in the new day, carrying stories of shared laughter and comfort, of doors opened and burdens carried together. Marcus and Luna walked the shore, picking their way among the storm's debris, greeting neighbors with tired smiles that spoke of relief and something deeper, an unspoken bond forged in the night. Back in the upper room, Luna placed a new shell beside her basin. She touched it lightly, feeling not a single story but many layered together, the echo of a town that had chosen, again and again, the gentle bravery of looking out for one another. Her blanket pulsed with a new motif, not just stars, but woven bands of light, a tapestry of courage, alive and growing. Marcus watched her, and in that quiet, ordinary morning, he understood that the real legacy of the Vindicators was not in grand gestures, but in moments like these, a lighthouse beam sweeping through rain, hands steady in the storm, a child collecting echoes of kindness until the whole world glowed with the promise that, together, they could always find their way home. Evening returned, soft and familiar. As the lighthouse began its patient sweep again, Luna's hum drifted through the rooms, soothing and sure, a lullaby stitched from every act of courage, every choice to keep the light burning. The storm had come and gone, but the warmth it left behind lingered, quietly binding everyone a little closer, a gentle promise that in darkness or dawn, the light would always remain. The days following the storm unfolded with the quiet purpose of a town that knew how to heal itself. Marcus moved through his familiar routines with extra care, checking every fitting and seal, replacing shingles that had been torn loose by the wind's fierce arguments with the lighthouse walls. Luna drifted between her upper room sanctuary and the newly calm shoreline, feeling the heroic frequency that had risen so powerfully during the gale now settling into the community, like warmth from banked coals, ready to kindle again whenever needed. On the third morning after the storm, when the sea had returned to its patient rhythm and the air smelled of salt and new beginnings, Marcus decided to tackle the storage room beneath the stairs. The cramped space had been neglected for years, filled with the accumulated debris of lighthouse keeping, broken compass pieces, coils of rope too frayed for serious use, charts of waters that had long since shifted their moods. The storm's dampness had crept through the old plaster, bringing with it the scent of time itself, like opening a book that had been closed for decades. As Marcus shifted a heavy wooden cabinet that had stood against the back wall since before Luna's arrival, his fingers brushed against something unexpected. Tucked in the narrow space behind the furniture, wrapped in oilcloth that had stubbornly kept its promise against time and weather, lay a tin box speckled with the gentle rust of patient years. The metal was cool to his touch, and when he lifted it, something inside shifted with the soft whisper of papers settling against each other. Luna appeared at his shoulder, as if summoned by the same invisible current that had always guided her to moments of significance. Together they carried the box to the kitchen table, where morning light could bless whatever secrets it contained. The lid opened with the small protest of hinges that had waited long to fulfill their purpose, revealing a collection of letters stacked like careful stones, each envelope bearing the patina of age and the weight of words chosen with profound care. The topmost letter bore no address, only a small seal pressed in wax, 3 simple points arranged in a triangle, not the bold emblem that had appeared in newspaper photographs, but something humbler, more intimate, like a signature meant only for friends. Luna lifted the letter with the same reverence she brought to her most precious tide pool treasures, unfolding paper that had grown thin from being read and refolded many times by hands that understood the value of connection across distance and time. "My dear friend," Luna read aloud, her voice finding the rhythm of words written by someone who chose each one like a gift. "I am not always brave, but I look for places where the light is steady and learn to stand still there." As she continued reading, her blanket, draped across her shoulders, began to shimmer with the same gentle recognition it showed whenever she encountered genuine heroic frequency. These were not the grand proclamations she might have expected from legendary heroes, but intimate confessions of doubt, fear, and the daily choice to continue caring despite uncertainty. The letters revealed the Vindicators not as distant figures of impossible perfection, but as people who struggled with the same fundamental questions Luna sensed in every act of courage she witnessed. How do you keep choosing hope when the world feels heavy with sorrow? What do you do when your strength feels insufficient for the tasks before you? How do you maintain faith in human goodness when cruelty seems to spread faster than kindness? Marcus listened with the quiet attention of someone who recognized wisdom when he heard it, watching Luna's face illuminate with understanding, as each letter revealed another facet of heroism's true nature. One letter spoke of a night spent sitting with a stranger on a harbor bench, sharing a thermos of coffee and the profound comfort of not being alone. Another described the writer's attempts to quiet panic by counting the rotations of a distant lighthouse beam, this very beacon that had guided them through their own dark hours. "We hoped the world would remember what quiet courage looks like," read one passage that seemed written directly to the future. "If it forgets, please remind it." Luna felt these words settle in her chest like seeds finding fertile ground, and she understood with sudden clarity that her role as keeper of heroic echoes was not accidental, but part of a design larger than she had ever imagined. As afternoon light slanted through the lighthouse windows, Luna carried the letters to her upper room sanctuary, where her collection of preserved heroic moments waited with patient anticipation. When she placed the aged correspondence among her modern treasures, the sea glass from Mrs. Henderson's grocery store kindness, the driftwood from the teenager's beach cleanup, the button from the shared umbrella, her blanket's patterns exploded into new complexity. Silver threads appeared, connecting not just contemporary acts of courage but weaving them together with the sacrificial love that had marked the Vindicators' final stand. The heroic frequency that resonated from the aged paper harmonized perfectly with her carefully preserved echoes of everyday heroism, creating a bridge across time that proved courage was a constant thread running through human experience. Luna realized that the Vindicators hadn't just saved the world from a specific threat. They had planted seeds of heroic possibility in every human heart, seeds that continued to bloom whenever someone chose love over fear, help over indifference, hope over despair. Over the following days, as if the storm had stirred them from their long slumber, more artifacts began to surface. Mrs. Henderson discovered a water-stained journal tucked behind a loose brick in her bakery's foundation. Tommy found a small leather pouch while helping repair storm damage at the harbor, its contents miraculously preserved despite decades of salt spray and weather. Each discovery made its way to Luna's sanctuary, where the growing collection of Vindicator correspondence revealed not weakness but profound humanity in the hero's admissions of doubt and fear. Inspired by these intimate glimpses into the hearts of legendary heroes, Luna began writing her own letters. She sat at the small desk Marcus had placed by the west window, her pencil steady in her small hand, crafting messages not to specific people, but to future heroes, anyone who might someday feel the weight of choice, the sting of doubt, or the quiet call to courage. "If you are tired, that makes sense," she wrote in her careful script. "If you are afraid, that is part of it. Please eat something warm. Please call someone and tell them one true thing. The light is patient. It will wait while you breathe." She signed each letter with a small drawing, a circle containing 3 gentle stars, her own mark of recognition for those who carried light in their hearts. Some evenings, Luna would tuck these letters into library books or slip them beneath loaves of bread left on doorsteps. Others she kept, folded beneath her basin of seawater, where the preserved echoes of courage could mingle with words of encouragement for those who would need them in times yet to come. As winter settled over the lighthouse, Luna's upper room had become something unprecedented, a living archive where the sacrificial love of legendary heroes merged seamlessly with the everyday courage of ordinary people. Each act of kindness preserved and honored as part of an unbroken chain of light stretching from the cosmic heights of the Vindicators' final stand to the simple warmth of neighbors helping neighbors weather life's storms. The letters had taught Luna that heroism was not a burden to be carried alone but a gift to be shared, passed from hand to hand and heart to heart, ensuring that the light kindled by the greatest sacrifice would never be extinguished as long as people continued to choose courage. In the quiet moments when no one else was watching, the winter that followed the discovery of the Vindicators, letters settled over the lighthouse like a gentle blanket, giving Luna time to absorb the profound intimacy of those aged words. As snow dusted the windows and Marcus tended the beacon through long, quiet nights, Luna found herself drawn repeatedly to the patch of earth behind the lighthouse, a neglected space where only the hardiest grasses survived the salt spray and harsh winds. Something in the letters had planted a seed in her heart, their words about hoping the world would remember what quiet courage looked like, echoing through her dreams. River returned with the first thaw, appearing through the morning mist, as if summoned by the same invisible current that had always guided Luna to moments of significance. This time, his leather satchel carried more than stories. Packets of seeds nestled among carefully wrapped saplings, each one chosen with the same intentional care Luna brought to her collection of heroic echoes. "The light you keep is ready to grow beyond walls," River said simply, his eyes twinkling as he watched Luna's gaze drift toward the untamed earth behind the lighthouse. "Some stories need soil and sun, rain and seasons. They need to breathe and bloom and give their seeds to the wind." Luna understood with the immediate clarity that had marked every important moment in her young life. The upper room sanctuary preserved the echoes of heroism, but the Vindicator's letters had awakened something deeper, a need to create something living that could nurture courage rather than simply remember it. She could envision it already, a garden where each plant would carry the essence of different types of heroism, where the heroic frequency she felt so keenly could take root and flourish. Marcus joined them in the planning, his practical hands sketching possible layouts in the sandy soil, while Luna described her vision with words that seemed too wise for her 7 years. They would plant roses for those who loved fiercely and protectively, their thorns a reminder that sometimes courage required boundaries, their blooms a celebration of hearts that chose tenderness, despite the world's harshness. Oak saplings would honor those who stood firm in their convictions, roots growing deep and strong, branches reaching steadily toward light no matter what storms might come. And wildflowers, Luna added, her small hands already moving as if scattering seeds, for those who brought joy in dark times, who bloomed in unexpected places, and reminded everyone that beauty could grow anywhere, even in the cracks of broken things. The townspeople arrived as naturally as seasons change, drawn by the same invisible threads that had always connected them to Luna's gift. Mrs. Henderson brought rich compost from her kitchen scraps, her weathered hands gentle as she helped prepare the soil. Tommy, now a young man whose own acts of service had earned him a place in Luna's collection, carried stones from the beach to create pathways and borders. Mrs. Chen contributed herbs from her grandmother's garden, each one carrying generations of careful tending. As they worked together, Luna felt the heroic frequency rising from their shared purpose, harmonizing like voices in a choir. She arranged her preserved treasures around the garden's perimeter, the sea glass from Mrs. Henderson's grocery store kindness, the driftwood from the teenagers' beach cleanup, the shell from the storm night when courage had connected every heart in town. Each object seemed to bless the soil it touched, sharing its stored echoes of heroism with the seeds that would soon call this earth home. The planting became a ceremony of quiet reverence. Luna's blanket, spread beneath her knees as she worked, shimmered with new patterns that seemed to map the garden's emerging design. Silver threads connected each planted seed to the preserved memories that had inspired its placement, creating a living constellation of courage that stretched from cosmic sacrifice to the smallest acts of everyday kindness. River taught Luna to read the subtle language of growing things, showing her how different plants would support and protect each other, how the hardier specimens could shelter the more delicate ones, how diversity created strength. Like people, he said softly, watching Luna position a climbing rose near the young oak sapling. The brave ones help the gentle ones reach higher, and the gentle ones remind the brave ones why the reaching matters. As spring warmed into early summer, the garden began to fulfill its promise. The roses unfurled their first tentative buds, releasing a fragrance that seemed to carry the essence of protective love. The oak saplings pushed new leaves toward the sun, with the quiet determination Luna recognized in every person who chose to keep trying, despite uncertainty. Wildflowers burst into bloom with joyous abandon, their bright faces turning toward the lighthouse beam, as if acknowledging the connection between all forms of light. Visitors came without invitation, but with perfect timing, drawn by something they couldn't name, but recognized in their hearts. They would sit on the simple bench Marcus had built from driftwood, watching bees work among the blossoms, feeling the gentle resonance of courage that emanated from every growing thing. Some left small tokens, a smooth stone, a pressed flower, a note of encouragement tucked beneath a plant, adding their own threads to the garden's expanding tapestry of heroism. Luna tended her living memorial, with the same gentle attention she had once given to tide pool creatures, humming softly as she worked. The sound had evolved from her childhood's simple harmonizing note into something richer, a lullaby that seemed to encourage growth in both plants and hearts. Her blanket's patterns grew more complex each day, showing how the Vindicators' cosmic sacrifice flowed through these earthbound testimonies, how their choice to dissolve into light had indeed planted seeds that continued to bloom in countless ordinary hearts. As summer deepened and the lighthouse beams swept across petals and leaves each night, Luna understood that she had created something unprecedented, a place where the memory of legendary heroism merged seamlessly with the living potential of everyday courage, ensuring that the light kindled by the greatest sacrifice would never be extinguished as long as people continued to choose love over fear in the quiet moments when no one else was watching. As autumn painted the garden in shades of amber and rust, Luna felt a different kind of hunger stirring in the hearts around her, not for the visual beauty of growing things, but for the deeper nourishment that comes from shared warmth and witnessed struggles. The heroic frequency she sensed so keenly had shifted with the season, carrying undertones of weariness, of people who needed not just inspiration but simple comfort, the kind that comes from knowing you're not alone in the quiet battles that mark ordinary days. River, who had lingered through the summer months like a gentle tide that forgets to turn, noticed it too. He would sit on the driftwood bench Marcus had built, watching visitors to the garden wrap their coats tighter against the evening chill, their faces soft with something that looked like longing. "Some courage," he said one morning as they tended the late-blooming roses, "lives in the simple act of continuing when hope feels thin. And sometimes that kind of courage needs soup and warm bread more than it needs flowers." Luna understood, with the immediate clarity that had marked every important moment in her young life. The garden preserved and celebrated heroism, But there were times when people needed to be held by heroism, wrapped in its warmth like her mysterious blanket on cold nights. The lighthouse base, with its sturdy stone walls and patient emptiness, seemed to offer itself as the answer to this unspoken need. Marcus approached the transformation with his characteristic blend of practicality and reverence. Together, they cleared decades of accumulated maritime debris, coils of rope gone stiff with salt, brass fittings green with age, charts of waters that had long since changed their moods. The space revealed itself slowly, like a room that had been waiting to remember its true purpose. Stone walls that had weathered countless storms now promised shelter of a different kind. Windows that had watched ships navigate treacherous waters would soon frame faces finding their way through more intimate tempests. They furnished the space with the gentle archaeology of community generosity. Mrs. Henderson contributed a round table worn smooth by generations of family meals. Tommy, now a young man whose own acts of service had earned him a place in Luna's collection, carried down chairs from various attics, mismatched but somehow harmonious, like voices in a choir that had learned to blend their differences. River coaxed the old stone fireplace back to life, its first flames chasing away the dampness and filling the air with the ancient comfort of wood smoke and warmth. Luna's role in this new sanctuary evolved as naturally as seasons change. Her gift for sensing the heroic frequency had deepened, allowing her to perceive not just moments of courage, but the specific comfort each weary heart required. She learned to read the language of need in the set of shoulders, the cadence of footsteps on the lighthouse path, the way someone held their hands. When Mrs. Chen arrived carrying the weight of a difficult day at the post office, Luna would guide her toward chamomile tea and the chair closest to the fire. When old Mr. Garrett appeared with the particular exhaustion that comes from fighting arthritis and loneliness in equal measure, she would offer him the corner seat where he could watch the room without feeling watched himself. The space acquired its own rhythm as naturally as tides. Mrs. Henderson became its unofficial heart, arriving each evening with baskets that breathed steam and the promise of nourishment. Her soups carried more than vegetables and broth. They held the essence of patience, of hands that had learned to transform simple ingredients into comfort. Her bread bore the imprint of early mornings and careful tending. Each loaf a small act of faith that someone would need its warmth. They established no formal rules, only gentle customs that emerged from the space's own wisdom. A wooden bowl sat on the central table, weathered smooth by Marcus's hands, where people could leave what they could spare, coins, stories written on scraps of paper, pressed flowers from the garden, promises to help a neighbor. Above it, Luna hung one of her letters to future heroes, written in her careful script. Take what you need, leave what you can share. The light is patient. As words spread through the quiet networks that connect all seeking hearts, the lighthouse base transformed into something unprecedented, a sanctuary where the day's small defeats could be acknowledged and the night's small victories celebrated. Conversations bloomed around the simple tables like flowers in unexpected soil. A fisherman whose nets had come up empty found himself teaching a young mother how to tie knots that would hold under pressure. A teacher struggling with a difficult class discovered comfort in the stories of a retired nurse who had learned to find hope in the smallest improvements. Luna moved through these gatherings with the same gentle attention she had once brought to tide pool creatures, humming softly as she served tea and listened to the stories that people carried like precious burdens. Her blanket, draped across her shoulders, continued its mysterious evolution, its patterns now mapping not just individual acts of heroism, but the connections forming between weary hearts, finding strength in shared vulnerability. The lighthouse beams swept its patient arc each night, but now its light illuminated more than ships finding safe harbor. Below, in the warm glow of the fireplace, ordinary people were discovering that courage could be as simple as showing up, as profound as listening, as transformative as sharing a meal with someone who understood that heroism often looked like the quiet choice to continue caring. When the world felt too heavy to carry alone, the first frost had touched the gardens. Edges when Sam appeared at the lighthouse door, carried there by River's gentle guidance and the same invisible current that had always brought wounded hearts to Luna's sanctuary. He arrived not during the dramatic flourish of a storm, But on one of those grey afternoons when the world seemed suspended between seasons, when the heroic frequency Luna sensed so, keenly carried undertones of loss and the particular exhaustion that comes from surviving when survival feels pointless, Rivers' hand rested lightly on the boy's shoulder as they stood in the doorway of the night kitchen, where the familiar warmth of Mrs. Henderson's soup and the soft murmur of evening conversations created a gentle counterpoint to the salt-scented wind. Sam was perhaps 12, with dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that had seen better seasons hanging loose on his thin frame. His eyes held the guarded emptiness Luna recognized from her letters to future heroes, the look of someone who had learned that hope could be dangerous, that caring too much led only to deeper wounds. "This is Sam," River said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of stories he hadn't yet shared. "His grandmother passed last month. She was the last of his people, and he's been carrying more than any young heart should hold." Luna felt the heroic frequency around Sam immediately, but it was different from any she'd encountered, muted and tangled, like a song played underwater, beautiful but struggling to reach the surface. Beneath his wariness, she sensed something achingly familiar, the particular courage of someone who had spent years being another person's strength, who had learned to thread needles and mend tears with the same careful attention she brought to preserving heroic echoes. Sam remained near the door, ready to retreat if kindness proved to be another form of cruelty. His gaze moved quickly over the room, taking inventory with the hypervigilance of someone who had learned that safety was temporary and comfort could be snatched away without warning. Luna understood instinctively that this boy's heroism had been channeled into practical service. He had been his grandmother's eyes when cataracts clouded her vision, her steady hands when arthritis made fine work impossible. When she died, he had lost not just his only family, but his entire sense of purpose. "There's soup," Luna said simply, her voice carrying none of the bright cheer adults sometimes used with grieving children, only the steady warmth of someone stating a truth. "And bread that's still warm. The chair by the fire is empty if you want it." She served him without fuss, setting the bowl and bread within easy reach, then returned to her other tasks, understanding that sometimes kindness needed to be offered sideways, without the weight of attention that could feel like pressure. As the evening unfolded, Luna watched Sam navigate the cafe's gentle rhythms with careful observation. He ate slowly, methodically, like someone who had known hunger. When Mrs. Chen mentioned her struggle with a package lost in the mail system, Sam's head lifted, with the first spark of interest she'd seen. When Tommy described his frustration with a boat engine that refused to start, Sam's hands moved slightly, as if remembering the feel of tools and the satisfaction of fixing broken things. These small responses told Luna more than words could have. Here was someone whose heroic frequency had been expressed through the quiet courage of solving problems and mending what others had given up on. Over the following days, Marcus began including Sam in the lighthouse's maintenance routines, recognizing something of his younger self in the boy's careful competence. Together, they cleaned the lens assembly with methodical precision, Sam's young hands proving surprisingly skilled at the delicate work of polishing brass and adjusting mechanisms. Luna watched him discover that his grandmother's lessons in attention to detail translated perfectly to the care of navigational equipment, that his heroic frequency could find new expression in keeping the beacon bright for ships that needed guidance. Through dark waters, the transformation wasn't dramatic. Sam's grief remained a constant companion, and his wariness never fully disappeared. But gradually, Luna began to sense his heroic frequency strengthening, like a plant that had been transplanted to better soil. When Mrs. Henderson's old mixing bowl developed a crack that threatened to split completely, Sam appeared with needle and thread, mending it with tiny, precise stitches that would hold for years. When a lost child's toy rolled under his chair in the cafe, he retrieved it without thinking. His first unconscious act of kindness, sparking a clear pulse of heroic frequency that made Luna's blanket shimmer with recognition. Luna realized that Sam's arrival had completed something important in the lighthouse's evolution. Her upper room sanctuary preserved the echoes of heroism. The garden celebrated courage in living form. The cafe provided warmth for weary hearts. But Sam represented something equally vital, the truth that heroism could be learned, that the frequency of courage could be rekindled even in hearts that had been broken by loss. As autumn deepened, Luna began teaching Sam about her gift, showing him how to recognize the heroic frequency in others, how to sense when someone needed encouragement or practical help. He proved an apt student, his own experience with loss making him particularly sensitive to the subtle signs of struggle. Together, they began expanding the lighthouse's mission, Sam learning that his own capacity for kindness, his choice to care despite his wounds, was the deepest form of heroism, a way to mend not just the world around him, but the broken places within himself. In Sam, Luna had found not just a friend, but a partner in the work of keeping the light, someone who understood that healing and helping others heal was its own form of heroism, ensuring that the sacrificial love of the Vindicators would continue to bloom in countless ordinary moments of choosing care over indifference, hope over despair. The winter that settled over the lighthouse during Luna's 13th year brought with it a different quality of quiet, one that spoke not of emptiness, but of completion drawing near. Marcus moved through his daily routines with the same steady devotion he had shown for nearly 4 decades, but Luna began to notice the subtle changes that time writes in gentle script across beloved faces. His morning climb to the beacon room now included thoughtful pauses at the narrow windows, moments he claimed were for checking weather patterns, but which he recognized as necessary rests for bones that had grown weary from faithful service. His hands, weathered by salt spray and countless nights of tending the light, moved with deliberate care as he polished the lens assembly, each gesture carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom. Sam, now tall enough to reach the highest mechanisms without assistance, began anticipating Marcus's needs with quiet intuition, appearing at his elbow with tools before they were requested, steadying ladders with the protective instinct of someone who understood that strength sometimes meant knowing when to offer support without being asked. "The light doesn't belong to any one person," Marcus said one February evening as they worked together in the beacon room, his voice carrying the patient cadence of someone who had learned to measure words like precious oil. "It belongs to everyone who needs guidance through dark waters. We're just the ones who've been trusted to keep it burning until others are ready to carry the responsibility forward." He showed them how to read the subtle signs of mechanical stress, how to anticipate problems before they became emergencies, how to maintain the delicate balance between vigilance and trust that defined true lighthouse keeping. Luna felt the heroic frequency around Marcus shifting, not diminishing, but transforming into something deeper and more profound. Where once it had pulsed with the active courage of a man battling storms and raising an unexpected child, now it resonated with a different kind of bravery, the heroism of acceptance, of letting go with grace, of trusting that the work he had begun would continue in other hands. She preserved this new frequency carefully, understanding that it represented one of the most difficult forms of courage, the willingness to step back when stepping back served the greater good. The town began to sense the approaching transition with the same intuitive awareness that had always connected them to the lighthouse's rhythms. Mrs. Henderson started visiting more frequently, bringing soups that required no special occasion and staying longer to share stories from her childhood when Marcus had first arrived as a young keeper, uncertain and grieving his own losses. Tommy, now a grown man with a family of his own, made excuses to check the harborside equipment, lingering to absorb whatever wisdom Marcus might offer about reading weather patterns and understanding the sea's moods. Spring arrived with its usual gentle insistence, coaxing new growth from the memorial garden and filling the night kitchen with the soft conversations of people who understood that some seasons marked endings as well as beginnings. Marcus spent longer hours sitting by the windows that faced the harbor, watching boats navigate the familiar channels with the satisfaction of someone who had helped guide countless vessels safely home. His logbook entries grew shorter but more precise, distilled to the essential truths that future keepers would need to understand. On a clear morning in early May, when the sea reflected the sky like polished glass and the garden bloomed with the roses he had planted years before, Marcus asked Luna and Sam to join him in the beacon room for what he called his final lesson. "Everything I've taught you about maintaining equipment and reading weather," he said, his voice soft but steady, "was really about something deeper. We tend the light so that others can find their way, But the real light we're keeping is the one that lives in human hearts, the choice to help rather than harm, to include rather than exclude, to hope rather than despair. He passed peacefully 3 days later, found by Luna at sunrise seated in his favorite chair facing the harbor, his weathered hands folded over a letter written in his careful script. "The light is yours now," it read. "Not to own but to tend, not to keep forever, but to pass along when your time comes. Remember that heroism isn't perfection, it's presence, the choice to care even when caring hurts, the promise that darkness never has the final word." As Luna and Sam prepared for their new responsibilities, they understood that Marcus's greatest gift hadn't been his technical knowledge or his steady presence through storms, but his demonstration that heroism was available to anyone willing to serve something larger than themselves. The lighthouse beam continued its patient rotation, guided now by younger hands, but carrying forward the same eternal promise, that in a world touched by darkness, there would always be those brave enough to keep the light burning, ensuring that the Vindicators' cosmic sacrifice lived on in countless small acts of everyday courage, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of human grace that connected every heart willing to choose love over fear. The months following Marcus's gentle farewell moved through the lighthouse like a tide learning new rhythms, carrying both the weight of loss and the steady promise of continuity. Luna and Sam inhabited their inherited responsibilities with the reverent care of people entrusted with something sacred. Each morning's beacon lighting and evening's extinguishing performed with the deliberate attention Marcus had taught them. The town wrapped around their grief like a familiar shawl, neighbors appearing with casseroles and quiet company, understanding that some transitions required the gentle support of many hands. But as summer deepened into autumn, Luna began to sense something troubling in the heroic frequency that had always guided her understanding of the world. Where once she had felt the warm, steady pulse of everyday courage, neighbors helping neighbors, teachers staying late for struggling students, strangers sharing umbrellas in sudden downpours, now she detected a different rhythm, fragmented and uncertain, like a song being sung by voices that had forgotten how to harmonize. The signs appeared gradually, scattered through ordinary conversations like seeds of worry, taking root in familiar soil. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that fewer people stopped to chat while buying bread, their faces turned inward with concerns they couldn't name. The harbor grew quieter as fishing boats sat unused, their owners unable to afford fuel or repairs. Mrs. Chen spoke of packages that went unclaimed because families couldn't spare the shipping fees, letters that carried both hope and the particular exhaustion that comes from stretching resources beyond their breaking point. Sam noticed it too, his own experience with loss making him sensitive to the subtle signs of community distress. "It's like everyone's fighting something they can't see," he said one evening as they tended the beacon together, his voice carrying wisdom earned through grief. "The heroic frequency is still there, but it's scattered. People are brave alone instead of brave together." Luna understood with growing clarity that their small coastal town was facing its own version of the cosmic battle that had marked her birth, not a dramatic confrontation between superpowered beings, but the slower, more insidious threat of despair seeping into hearts that had grown weary from economic uncertainty. This was her generation's last stand, she realized, not a battle against external enemies wielding cosmic weapons, but against the internal darkness of hopelessness that threatened to extinguish the light of human connection. She began organizing the community not for war, but for collective care, understanding that heroism in this context meant weaving networks of support that could sustain people through the long, patient work of rebuilding hope. The night kitchen expanded its purpose, becoming a hub where practical help could be offered without shame. Luna introduced what Sam dubbed repair nights, gatherings where people brought broken things and left with more than fixed objects. They brought wobbly chairs and departed with the knowledge that the world could still be mended. They brought sputtering radios and discovered the satisfaction of working together toward solutions. River, who had returned with the same intuitive timing that had always marked his arrivals, helped establish story circles around the central table. These weren't grand tales of legendary heroes, but gentle accounts of everyday resilience, how someone had managed to stretch a small meal into a feast for unexpected guests, how a kind word had transformed a difficult day. How shared laughter had lightened an impossible burden. Luna would sit among the storytellers, her blanket draped across her shoulders, feeling the heroic frequency strengthen with each shared narrative. Her upper room sanctuary revealed its deeper purpose during this crisis, as the preserved echoes of past heroism became sources of current inspiration. When Mrs. Henderson felt overwhelmed by the number of people seeking help at her bakery, Luna guided her to touch the sea glass that held the memory of grocery store kindness from years before, letting her feel the ripple effects of generosity that had spread far beyond that single moment. When Tommy doubted whether his efforts to organize work crews for struggling families made any difference, she showed him the driftwood that preserved the echo of the teenage beach cleanup, helping him understand how one person's initiative could inspire lasting change. The memorial garden became the foundation for shared plots where families could grow food together, the roses that honored protective love, blooming alongside vegetables that fed hungry neighbors. Sam organized skill exchanges, where the baker taught bread making to families struggling with food costs, while the retired teacher offered tutoring in exchange for help with her garden. Mrs. Chen shared her grandmother's embroidery techniques, creating not just beautiful patterns, but threads of connection between generations. Support networks bloomed from these exchanges, like wildflowers finding purchase in unexpected soil. The wooden bowl in the night kitchen, once for spare coins, now collected offers of help. An extra hour of babysitting, a shared ride to the next town, a promise to listen without judgment. People who had once felt isolated by their struggles found themselves part of a larger tapestry of care, each thread strengthening the whole. As winter approached, Luna felt the heroic frequency beginning to harmonize once again, individual notes of courage, finding their way back into the greater symphony of human kindness. The crisis was far from over, but the community had learned something precious, that their greatest strength lay not in individual heroism, but in the collective choice to care for one another through whatever storms might come. Standing in the beacon room one snow-soft evening, watching the light sweep across a town where windows glowed with shared warmth and kitchens hummed with the quiet conversations of people who had remembered how to hope together, Luna understood that she was witnessing the true legacy of the Vindicators' sacrifice, not the dramatic salvation of the world from a single threat, but the quiet, persistent work of ordinary people choosing connection over isolation, love over the easier path of indifference, proving once again that darkness never had the final word as long as people continued to choose the light. As spring deepened into summer and Luna entered her 16th year, she began to sense something stirring beyond the familiar boundaries of her coastal community, a distant resonance in the heroic frequency that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Her dreams had grown more vivid, filled with glimpses of other shores where different hands tended similar lights, other gardens where courage bloomed in unfamiliar soil. The blanket that had wrapped her on her arrival night now displayed patterns that seemed to reach beyond any geography she knew, silver threads stretching toward horizons that existed somewhere between sleeping and waking. Sam noticed the change first, observing how Luna would pause during their evening routines to gaze toward the sea with an expression of profound listening, as if she could hear voices carried on currents that traveled farther than any ship. "There are others," she said one night as they tended the beacon together, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had finally found words for a feeling that had been growing like a seed in winter soil. "I can feel them in the spaces between the heroic moments here. Other keepers, other lights, other people who understand what we're preserving." The confirmation arrived with the autumn storms, carried not by wind or wave, but by a young woman whose travel-worn appearance and careful steps spoke of journeys measured in hope rather than miles. Elena appeared at the lighthouse door during the grey hour between sunset and full darkness, her dark hair braided with small shells that chimed softly in the salt breeze, her eyes holding the particular brightness Luna recognized in all truly courageous hearts. "I was born on the night the heroes fell silent," Elena said simply, her voice carrying traces of mountain air and distant places. "I've been dreaming of a lighthouse keeper who preserves the echoes of heroism, and a traveling storyteller finally told me where to find you." She carried her own collection of preserved courage, memory stones that held the emotional essence of heroic moments from her mountain community, each one warm to the touch and humming with the same frequency Luna had learned to recognize as the heartbeat of human kindness. As they shared stories over steaming bowls in the night kitchen, Luna realized that her childhood assumption about being uniquely gifted had been both true and incomplete. She was indeed special, but not singular. Across the world, others born on that cosmic night carried similar abilities, each one adapted to their particular landscape and community. Eleanor spoke of Mira, a desert librarian who could sense courage in the patterns of sand and wind, preserving moments of bravery in vials of crystalline dust. She described Jonah, a mountain keeper who felt heroic intentions in the behavior of weather and wildlife, creating carved tokens that held the essence of protective choices made during harsh winters. "We've been finding each other slowly," Elena explained, her hands cradling a cup of Mrs. Henderson's mint tea. "Through dreams sometimes, or stories that reach us through travelers like River. We're starting to understand that we're connected not just by our gifts, but by our purpose. We're the Vindicators' true legacy, not superpowered individuals, but ordinary people committed to extraordinary care." Over the following weeks, more connections revealed themselves through the patient networks that connect all seeking hearts. Letters arrived through various channels, each one carrying preserved moments of courage from distant shores. A package from Mira contained vials of desert sand that shimmered with the echoes of teachers protecting students during flash floods, grandmothers sharing precious water during droughts, children helping elderly neighbors navigate scorching streets. From a coastal city came pressed flowers from rooftop gardens where people had chosen to create beauty in concrete landscapes, each bloom holding the memory of someone who had refused to let urban harshness extinguish their capacity for gentleness. Sam proved invaluable in organizing this expanding correspondence, his practical mind creating what they called echo exchanges, careful trades of preserved moments that allowed each keeper to experience the heroic frequency as it manifested in different landscapes and cultures. Luna would touch a vial of desert sand and feel the particular courage required to share precious water during times of scarcity. Eleanor would hold one of Luna's tide pool treasures and experience the specific bravery needed to stand steady during coastal storms. The lighthouse itself began to respond to this expanding network, its beam growing stronger and more focused, as if drawing power from the collective preservation of heroic moments happening worldwide. Luna's blanket transformed into a living map of global heroism, its nighttime patterns now showing silver threads that connected distant acts of courage, revealing how a moment of kindness in one place resonated with similar choices made thousands of miles away. Through their correspondence, Luna learned that each keeper had faced their own version of the crisis she had witnessed in her community: economic hardship, social isolation, the slow erosion of hope that threatened to extinguish the light of human connection. But each had also discovered the same truth she had found, that heroism multiplied when people worked together, that preserved moments of courage could inspire new acts of bravery, that the Vindicators' cosmic sacrifice lived on in every choice to care about something beyond oneself. As winter approached and the network of keepers continued to expand, Luna understood that her role had evolved beyond preserving local heroic echoes. She had become a coordinator in a worldwide web of ordinary people doing extraordinary work, ensuring that the frequency of courage would continue to pulse through human hearts across all landscapes and cultures, proving that the light kindled by the greatest sacrifice would never be extinguished as long as people continued to choose love over fear in the quiet moments when heroism was born. This years that carried Luna into her 25th year moved through the lighthouse like patient tides, each season deepening the connections that now stretched across continents like silver threads in her ever-evolving blanket. The correspondence that had begun with Elena's arrival had grown into something unprecedented, a living network of frequency keepers who shared preserved moments of courage across vast distances, creating a global archive of heroism that pulsed with the same gentle rhythm Luna had first felt as a child, witnessing her neighbor's kindness. Sam, now a man whose steady presence anchored the lighthouse's daily operations, had become the network's practical coordinator. His experience with loss had taught him to recognize the subtle signs of communities in need, and he organized what they called echo exchanges, careful shipments of preserved heroic moments that allowed keepers worldwide to experience courage as it manifested in different landscapes and cultures. A vial of desert sand from Mira's collection would arrive carrying the echo of water shared during drought, while Luna's tide pool treasures traveled to mountain communities, where they whispered of coastal storms. Weathered together, the lighthouse itself had transformed into something between sanctuary and pilgrimage site. The upper room now spilled into adjacent spaces, shelves crafted from driftwood holding treasures from around the world, memory stones that hummed with mountain courage, crystalline formations that preserved urban acts of kindness, pressed flowers from rooftop gardens, where people had chosen beauty over despair. Luna moved through this expanded archive with reverent attention, beginning each morning with what she called her listening time, touching various preserved echoes and feeling the heroic frequency as it manifested across cultures and circumstances. The memorial garden behind the lighthouse had become a living testament to the global reach of everyday heroism. Roses climbed trellises built from wood, donated by communities across 6 continents, their blooms releasing fragrances that seemed to carry the essence of every protective act they represented. Wildflowers from impossible climates found ways to thrive in the carefully tended soil, creating combinations of beauty that spoke to the universal nature of courage. Visitors would kneel among the blossoms, leaving their own tokens, smooth stones, handwritten notes, pressed leaves, each one adding to the garden's gentle chorus of preserved heroism. The night kitchen operated around the clock now, staffed by volunteers who had learned to recognize the subtle signs of hearts in need of comfort. Mrs. Henderson, silver-haired but still carrying warmth in her weathered hands, had trained a new generation of community caretakers who understood that nourishment meant more than food. They served the deeper sustenance that comes from being truly seen and valued, creating a model that had been replicated in communities worldwide through the network's influence. Word of the lighthouse traveled through the quiet channels that connect all seeking hearts. People arrived not as tourists seeking spectacle, but as pilgrims searching for connection to their own capacity for courage. They came to touch the sea glass in Luna's collection, feeling the echoes of grocery store kindness. They sat in story circles around the night kitchen's central table, sharing gentle accounts of everyday resilience. How someone had stretched a small meal into a feast for unexpected guests. How a kind word had transformed a difficult day. How shared laughter had lightened an impossible burden. The ripple effect spread like circles on water. A desert community adapted the repair night model to mend wells and marriages in the same courtyard. A northern port borrowed the night kitchen's donation bowl and filled it with ferry tickets for families who hadn't seen the ocean in years. A city block started a window choir, and arguments on the street diminished in proportion to the nights they sang lullabies to whoever needed them. None of these efforts appeared on evening news, but they traveled through deeper channels, the way warmth travels under a closed door. During the network's monthly resonance nights, when keepers worldwide would simultaneously access their preserved collections, Luna's blanket would shimmer with activity that looked like neural networks firing, like galaxies being born. Through these synchronized experiences, she began to understand that the network had become something greater than the sum of its parts. The frequency keepers weren't just preserving individual moments of courage, they were nurturing a global shift in human consciousness, proving that heroism was not an aberration, but the natural state of hearts that remembered their connection to something larger than themselves. River, whose visits had become as regular as seasons, would sit in the night kitchen and marvel at what had grown from the simple act of a baby being left on a doorstep. The heroes knew, he would say, watching Luna move through her expanded sanctuary with the grace of someone who had learned to tend light in all its forms. They understood that their sacrifice would plant seeds that would grow into something beautiful beyond imagining. Standing in the beacon room on clear nights, watching the light sweep across a world where heroism bloomed in countless ordinary moments, Luna felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had found their true purpose. The lighthouse beam illuminated not just ships seeking safe harbor, but a global community where ordinary people were making extraordinary choices, each one a star in the constellation of courage that connected every human heart capable of love, ensuring that the Vindicators' cosmic sacrifice lived on in every choice to help rather than harm, to hope rather than despair. The years had moved through Luna's life like gentle tides, each one carrying away what was no longer needed, while leaving behind the essential truths that would endure long after her footsteps faded from the lighthouse path. By the time silver threads began weaving themselves through her hair, the same color as the patterns that danced across her mysterious blanket each night, Luna had grown into the role she was born to fill, not just a keeper of heroic echoes, but a living bridge between the cosmic sacrifice that had marked her birth and the everyday courage that continued to bloom in countless ordinary hearts. Sam, now a man whose own children had learned to recognize the heroic frequency in simple acts of neighborhood kindness, maintained the lighthouse's mechanical heart with the same devoted precision Marcus had taught them both. His weathered hands moved through the daily routines with practiced reverence, understanding that each adjustment of the lens, each careful measurement of oil, each entry in the logbook was part of something far greater than maritime safety. The beam that swept across the waters each night now illuminated a world transformed by the network they had helped nurture, where frequency keepers on every continent preserved and shared the echoes of courage that proved heroism was humanity's natural state. The memorial garden behind the lighthouse had grown wild and wonderful over the decades, roses climbing toward the beacon's light, while wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion. Each blossom held the memory of someone who had chosen hope over despair, their preserved courage creating a living tapestry that drew pilgrims from around the world. They came not as tourists seeking spectacle, but as souls searching for connection to their own capacity for kindness, kneeling among the flowers to leave tokens of their own heroic moments, smooth stones from distant shores, pressed leaves from urban gardens, handwritten promises to carry the light forward. Luna's upper room sanctuary had expanded to fill the lighthouse's entire upper level, shelves crafted from driftwood, holding treasures that hummed with preserved heroism from every corner of the globe. Memory stones from mountain communities, crystalline formations that captured urban acts of kindness, vials of desert sand that shimmered with the echoes of water shared during drought, each object connected to every other through the silver threads of her blanket, now vast as a star chart, mapping the invisible connections between every act of courage ever preserved. The night kitchen operated around the clock, staffed by volunteers who had learned Mrs. Henderson's recipes for both soup and comfort. The space had become a model replicated in communities worldwide, proving that the deepest nourishment came not from food alone, but from being truly seen and valued. The wooden bowl on the central table, now worn smooth by countless hands, continued to collect what people could spare: coins, stories, pressed flowers, promises to help a neighbor, while the walls held Luna's letters to future heroes, their gentle wisdom available to anyone who needed reminding that courage was always a choice, never a burden. Through her correspondence with Elena, Mira, Jonah, and dozens of other frequency keepers, Luna had watched the network grow into something unprecedented, a global web of ordinary people doing extraordinary work, ensuring that the Vindicators' cosmic sacrifice lived on in every choice to help rather than harm. The heroic frequency that had once seemed like a unique gift now pulsed through communities worldwide, nurturing movements of healing that transformed individual acts of kindness into rivers of change. As Luna entered her 70th year, she began preparing for her own gentle transition with the same careful attention she had always brought to preserving heroic moments. She wrote final letters by lamplight, while the lighthouse beam swept its eternal arc, each word chosen with profound care. "If you are reading this," she wrote in her still steady script, "then you have been chosen to tend the light that lives in human hearts. Remember that heroism is not perfection, but presence, not power, but the choice to care even when caring hurts. The echoes you preserve are seeds of possibility, proof that courage is contagious, and love is the strongest force in any universe." On her final morning, Luna woke to find the sunrise painting the sea in shades of gold and rose, the same colors that had wrapped her blanket on the night of her arrival. She climbed the spiral stairs one last time, carrying a small vial of seawater from the tide pools where she had first learned to preserve courage. In the beacon room, surrounded by treasures that held a lifetime of heroic echoes, she felt the frequency humming stronger than ever through the world, a vast, gentle symphony composed of countless small acts of bravery that proved the light could never be extinguished. Sam found her there as the sun reached its zenith, seated peacefully in the chair that faced the harbor, her weathered hands folded over a letter written in her careful script. "The light continues," it read, "not because any one person tends it, but because every heart that chooses kindness adds fuel to its flame. I have been honored to serve as keeper of these echoes, but the real keepers are everyone who remembers that heroism lives in the daily choice to hope rather than despair." As news of Luna's peaceful passing spread through the networks she had helped create, something remarkable happened. Across the world, frequency keepers and ordinary people alike began sharing their own preserved moments of courage, creating a global chorus that proved the light she had tended would never be extinguished. The lighthouse beam continued its patient sweep, now guided by Sam and the next generation of keepers, carrying forward the eternal promise that in a world touched by darkness, there would always be those brave enough to choose love. And somewhere in the turning of that light, in the whisper of waves against familiar shores, in the laughter of children playing in gardens where courage bloomed like wildflowers, Luna's voice could still be heard, humming the frequency of heroes, reminding anyone who listened that the light would always find a way to shine, and that every heart capable of kindness carried within it the power to save the world, one small act of courage at a time. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.